Okay, I got the thumbs up. We're all live. Good to see you tonight. And even though I can't see, if you're joining us online, welcome. I got to tell you, I don't know about you folks. I've come to the conclusion that you guys will just swallow anything that I tell you. I came in here last week and I pronounced there are 5 Wednesdays in March, and so we have 3 classes left, and I'm going to finish Luke on time. Well, there were 3 classes left, but not because there are 5 Wednesdays in March. There are only 4. And I think maybe one person pointed it out to me, but the rest of you guys didn't. You just say, okay. Yeah, okay. 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 So anyway, we got 2 classes. We got 2 classes left. We got a little over a chapter to do. Theoretically, we might finish tonight. I don't think so, but we'll probably wrap up next week. And then maybe the worst news for you, the good news is we're almost done, and Tim is going to take over the class and start a series on the life of David. The bad news is he's not going to be here for the first 2 weeks in April. And the worst news is that I'm going to fill in for him, okay? And I don't know what I'm going to do because what I suggested doing, Tim told me I couldn't. So if you got something you want me to do, I'm open to suggestions at this point, trying to figure it out. But we're in Luke chapter 23. We ended last week with the crucifixion, talked a little bit about the thief on the cross. We ended up in verses 44 through 49 where he dies. Okay. One of the things we didn't say that I intended to is Jesus, verse 46, it says, Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Interestingly, I read in a couple of different places is that this is something that young Jewish children would pray at night as part of their going to bed prayers. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And so, Jesus going to the Father, just adds a little kind of interest to what he is saying there. And so he dies, and Luke points out that all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. And so tonight we're going to pick up in verse 50 and talk about something we usually read through pretty fast, and that's the burial. It's the death and the burial and the resurrection. We want to talk about the death a lot, and we want to talk about the resurrection a lot. We usually don't talk very much about the burial. Well, oh yeah, Joseph of Arimathea, put him in a tomb. That was it. Okay, yep. And we kind of wander on. But it's interesting that all 4 Gospels make a point of the fact that Joseph of Arimathea goes to Pilate and asks for permission for the body and puts him in a tomb. Let's read those verses in Luke. Verse 50. Now there was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man who had not consented to their decision and action. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea and was waiting for the kingdom of God. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body. And then he took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth, and placed it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. So Jesus dies about 3 o'clock. Okay? And it's also the time we pointed out last week when they commenced killing the Passover lambs in the temple grounds for folks to celebrate the Passover. And so this guy, Joseph of Arimathea, he's on the Sanhedrin. And it says that he did not consent to what they did. Apparently, they met without him because if you read the account in Mark, it was a unanimous decision. It was early in the morning, Caiaphas, I think, arranged, speculation is Caiaphas arranged the folks that were going to, he wanted there that he knew would vote the way that he wanted to. And Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, we don't need you this morning, okay, or just didn't tell him. But he didn't consent, and so he goes to Pilate and asks for the body. I've read 3 different things that happened to folks who were crucified. One is Romans just took the body and dumped it someplace. Didn't bury it, threw it in a ditch, threw it in a valley, let it stay there and rot for people to see and to understand this awaits you if you cross us. Others say that the Romans took them and would bury them, but they would bury them like in a pauper's grave. And then apparently if there was an occasion where there were family members, they could petition and have the body turned over to them. And so that's apparently what Joseph of Arimathea is doing. He's going to Pilate and asking for the body. What's the problem? What problem did Joseph have going and asking for the body of Jesus?
He was on the Sanhedrin.
Well, he was on the Sanhedrin, okay. I don't know if it says it here. One of the other gospel accounts talks about how he was a believer in Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews. So certainly one of the problems he has is he's coming out. He's taking a stand that, what you guys did was wrong, and this good man deserves a decent burial. But he had another problem. It was the problem that the Sanhedrin had when they approached Pilate. If you remember, we talked about the tunnel underneath the temple grounds and how they stayed on one side of the temple and Pilate one side of the tunnel, and Pilate apparently came to the other side for them to talk to him. Remember what the problem was? Okay, it's the Passover. If we go into the fortress of Antonia, if we go into Pilate's presence, we're going to be unclean, and that is going to disavow us the ability to celebrate the Passover. Well, don't have any sense that Joseph of Arimathea has the kind of pull to go and demand that, insist that Pilate come down to the tunnel and stand on the other side and talk to him. So he basically, yes?
Touching a dead body is going to make him unclean anyway.
That's true.
Sorry.
Okay? You're like Chris. You're about 60 seconds ahead of me. Okay? So, the very act of going and asking for it and then having the body and doing something with it is going to make him unclean for the Passover. But he goes and he does that and takes it, wraps it in linen, does a temporary, he doesn't have enough time. Darkness is coming. Okay? Doesn't have a lot of time, so he wraps it, does something, until the ladies who are watching, who are going to come back and do the ritualistic stuff, the embalming that they thought was going to take place. First off, what does that say? The fact that they're making preparations to come back after the Sabbath is over, after the Passover is over, and to address Jesus' body, what does that say about their state of mind?
I think it says they're just like us. We hear it, but seeing it or implementing it in real life, it's just totally different.
He's dead and gone, okay? Not the expectation, despite what we've read even here in Luke on several occasions where Jesus says, I'm going to come back to life. They're not acting from a mindset and from a mind frame that's what they're expecting. They're expecting him to be dead. They're expecting when they go back after the Sabbath on the first day of the week that he's still going to be there and he's still going to be dead. So he gets the body, and it says that he put him in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. Why does that matter?
So that Nobody's going to confuse his body with somebody else's
Okay.
body.
Yeah, yeah. No, that body, this is a tomb. They've drug bodies out of there before. It's a place, and he's the only one that's there, and it's a particular place. Okay, not. Yeah, he was crucified. The Romans took him. They threw him in a ditch someplace, or they put him in a pauper's grave. We don't know where he went. We don't know where the body was, but he's alive now. That argument is null and void because he's going to a particular place, to a tomb. It's a new tomb. You can't confuse him with anybody else. There's not another body there saying, no, that's really him. Okay. And people see it and they know it. The ladies see it and they know where it is. And it's part of the whole presentation of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. When you look at the gospel accounts, and we've said a couple of times, we're not trying to go through and align and deal with every sort of instance. Each of the gospels tells this story a little bit different. Okay, they highlight different details. They omit certain details. There are some parts that we're going to read tonight that are unique to Luke's gospel, not only in what he said, but also in some of the things that he didn't say. And we're going to explore a little bit about, why is that? And for me, in one sense, the fact that the four gospels are not parroting exactly the same thing, the same words, all of the same incidents in the exact same order, frankly, leads credibility to the accounts. It's not like these guys got together and said, we got to come up with a story. Okay, so we're going to say this, and we're going to say this, and we got to say it exactly that way. And they all get up and they say it exactly the same way. If you did that in court, had a bunch of witnesses come up and they all parrot exactly the same thing in exactly the same words, jury starts getting suspicious. That sounds fabricated. They've got their story together. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I was just going to say it sounds like the news.
Okay. Okay. All right. Wait. Wasn't going to go there. All right. We do that. We tell even ourselves, when we tell a story multiple times to different people, we tell it different. Okay? And I won't bore you with it again, but if you go on a long trip and you go a bunch of different places, you may tell somebody that you're encouraging to take that trip everything that you did, exactly in the order that you did it. Okay? You may tell somebody else about the same trip and just tell them about the places you really liked. Okay? And not even tell them about some of the things that you did. Okay? Or you might tell somebody else the things that you didn't like. Man, I'll never go there again. And all of them would still be true. Okay? The folks wouldn't accuse you of, well, you're telling a different story. You didn't tell them that. And even this idea about, how many angels and how many witnesses, and was it a man, was it an angel, and Jesus showing up, all of that stuff, just think about, and maybe this is not a good analogy, and you can shoot holes in it if it doesn't work, but just to help us just not get wrapped around the axle and get nervous when somebody says, the gospel accounts, they just contradict each other, is think about yourself being in a city that you're not real familiar with, and you've got an event to go to, and you're walking, and so you stop somebody to ask them for directions. You stop a couple of guys, and one of them tells you, well, yeah, go down here, 3 blocks and turn right, and then turn left after a couple more, and gives you directions. You say, thank you very much. You go on. A little bit later, you're not quite sure, You know, was it 3 blocks and turn right, or was it 2 blocks and turn right? And so you stop somebody else, somebody by themselves this time. And you say, you know, I'm trying to get over here, and I think, am I going the right way? And say, you're going the right way, okay? And so you get to your event, and somebody asks you, you say, well, you know, do you have any trouble finding your way here? You tell one person, yeah, a couple guys. I stopped a couple guys, and they told me how to get there. Okay? One of the guys never said anything, but there were a couple of guys. Somebody else asked you, do you have any trouble getting here? Well, yeah, you know, a guy told me how to get here. Didn't tell him there was 2, just told him, you know, the guy who talked to me, that's the one who gave me directions. Okay? Or then a little later on, somebody says, so how'd you get, you know, did you have any wrong turns? I said, yeah, I got a little bit confused. And so I stopped this one guy, and I asked him if I'm going in the right way. All of those stories are true. It's just you're talking to different people, and you're communicating something different in each of those cases. So when you read through the gospel accounts, don't immediately consider, oh, well, you know, these guys were, you know, just so dumb they couldn't get their facts straight, you know, and they're mixing up simple things. It's really not that way. And there are scenarios and there are explanations for how all these things fit together and they make sense. If you're interested in that in detail, this book that I've been pushing a couple of times, Prelude to Glory by Brother Leeper, goes into detail and shows how all of those accounts can mesh together. Chris?
When you study the gospel accounts and you try to harmonize them, from what I've studied, there's the scholars think that Mark was the first book written of the Gospels, and they call it kind of, they've got a name for it, but they're saying that was like the original text, and then the others took some from Mark and they put other stuff together. In other words, I don't believe that, but what they do is if they can find one thing that they think is the first or the one that the others are copying from, they want to try to say, well, it's all copied from this guy or that guy.
Yeah.
And so if all of these accounts were the same, then somebody would say, oh, it's just all copied from one guy that made it up. And
you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, so you can't win when, in other words, with the skeptics.
Yeah.
If you want to try to discredit it, if it sounds too close to the same, they'll discredit it. If it sounds too different, they'll discredit it. You know, it's, I don't know why it is in humankind, but even with truth, our first instinct is to try to debunk it.
Yeah.
And
well, and certainly we live in a time and a culture where that's been kind of accented. As we talked about last week, each of the Gospels they're talking to a different audience. You know, the audience that Matthew is writing to that have a deep heritage and background in the law of Moses and understanding the prophecies and the Old Testament commands, talks about all of the events in Jesus' life, and including the death, burial, and the resurrection in the context of folks who should understand, should have recognized the prophecies, should have, you know, how this all demonstrates that he's the Messiah. Mark was really into talking about the power that Jesus had. And when you read through his gospel, he goes out of his way to talk about the ability and the power that Jesus had over nature, over other people, over his enemies. It seems to be a focus of his gospel. Luke tells us at the beginning of his gospel what he did. He said, you know, there are accounts out there. I decided to look into all of this and to come up, you know, in detail and come up and present to you what occurred. He, of course, as we've talked about all the way through, is writing to a Gentile audience, okay, who don't have the background that the readers of Matthew's gospel had. And we're going to see here in a few minutes when we look at some of the things that Luke doesn't talk about. I think it's specifically related to the fact that he's writing to a Gentile audience. John, of course, comes along a few decades later, dealing with Gnostics, dealing with, you know, it's been a few years now since the resurrection, and giving his his eyewitness account of what he saw. So Luke started saying all of that. When you boil the Gospels down, there are 6 things that they all present as fact. Okay? And all the other stuff are details and incidents and snippets of stuff that they pick as part of their narrative. But the first thing that they're all clear on is that Jesus was dead when he was removed from the cross. Okay? One of the Gospels goes into a lot of detail about the fact, they were going to break the legs, but a Roman soldier saw he was dead and stabbed him in the side, and blood and water came out. He was dead. There was no doubt about the fact that he was dead when he was taken off the cross. Second thing was what we just talked about with the tomb, that he was placed in a particular tomb. They didn't just get rid of the body and folks started claiming he was alive. They didn't put him in some place where folks could get confused. It's in a place belonged to that guy. It was his tomb. It had never been used, and they put the body there. Third thing was that the tomb was sealed and guarded. Okay? Luke, interestingly, doesn't talk about this in his gospel. Okay? In fact, when you read through this, after the crucifixion, after Pilate turns him over, there's not mention of Romans. Why would Luke not want to talk about Romans and Roman soldiers? And Roman soldiers, they got overcome by an earthquake and an angel to roll the stone away. Why would he not want to talk about that? Probably, quite possibly a Roman official. It doesn't change the facts of what happened, okay? And makes Rome look bad. Jesus was not a revolutionary coming to physically overthrow the Roman government. So Luke just doesn't talk about that, okay? But the Gospels are agreed that the tomb was sealed and guarded, and that it was, number 4, it was later, the tomb was found empty. Okay? All of the Gospels agree the tomb was empty. The tomb is still empty. And, even today, seems like whenever, there's some issue with Scripture or some theological thorny problem, or somebody is just really outspoken, antagonistic against Christianity, the thing I always think of is, is the tomb empty? The tomb is empty. I mean, until you deal with and explain to me that Jesus is not resurrected, the tomb's empty, and you can go around and talk about whatever you want, but it doesn't change what I believe, is that the tomb is empty. Fifth thing was, after he was alive, he was seen by people who knew him. Why is that a significant thing, that he was seen by folks who knew him? Seems like the accusation would be of course he was, folks who knew him, they wanted this, and they were all emotional and all this sort of stuff. So you can't have any credence to the fact that people knew him said he's alive. What's the problem with that?
I mean, that goes back to eyewitness. I mean, that's kind of evidence, so to speak. And I think wasn't it in Hebrew law something about, eyewitnesses versus hearsay?
You need to establish things with witnesses.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you imagine going, watching a trial, some automobile accident, and you have 3 or 4 witnesses that testify what happened, and the opposing attorney getting up and say, whoops, we can't trust your testimony because you believe it happened. Okay. Well, I thought that's what a witness did. See, they talk about the things that they've seen and heard and that they know. As we've already seen, and we'll see again even more in a few minutes when we read, reality is the folks that are the witnesses to the resurrection, they were not expecting it. Okay, we've already talked about the women. They're preparing the spices to embalm him. It's not because they're expecting to go to the tomb on Sunday and find it empty. They're expecting it to be there. Okay? So it was, and also, you want the resurrected Jesus to be seen by people that know him, because you don't want strangers saying, I think that's him. You know, I'm not sure. You know, I was in the crowd and I was towards the back, and that kind of looks like him. It's, you got Peter standing up and saying, he's alive. And you crucified him. You got John writing later in his life, said, we're eyewitness. I'm writing to you about the things that I have seen and that I know. So that, you know, died for it. Yes, good point. And then lastly is that the resurrected body of Jesus is the same body that was crucified and that was put in the tomb. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about the Gnostics and some of the things that, you know, they tried to say, well, you know, he really wasn't human. He just sort of looked kind of human. He was a spirit of some sort, and or this guy walking around, that's not the same guy that was on the cross. And so we're going to read tonight Jesus saying, you know, look at my hands, you know, give me some fish. Let me eat some fish. So those 6 things, regardless of all of the, you know, the surrounding things that the different Gospels talk about, they're united on those aspects of this. So let's read a little bit, beginning in chapter 24, verse 1. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb. But when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly 2 men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here, he's risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. Okay? All the way back, I think, from as early as Luke chapter 9, we've got Jesus pulling those closest to him aside and saying, I'm headed to Jerusalem. And the Son of Man is going to be betrayed. He's going to be crucified. He's going to die. And then on the third day, he's going to rise. Over and over again, multiple times. They don't get it. Okay? It's hard for us on this side to go, man, why were they so surprised? He's been telling them, he's been doing all of this stuff. But we got the hindsight of 2,000 years afterwards, and all the folks that have studied and all the lives that have been lived on that basis. All of the study of the Old Testament and the prophecies. You know, if we had been there, I think we would have just been just as clueless. We would have just. I hear him say he's going to rise from the dead. What does that mean? Maybe that means, you know, the spirit of what he's talked about is going to live on. Or you know, who knows what they speculated amongst themselves. But over and over in the next few verses, we're going to see Luke make the point that, oh yeah, that's what he was talking about. And it's like finally as it actually happened. And I think Luke is doing this deliberately, one, because that's the way it was, but two, also because he's just dispelling this idea that he wasn't really raised. These guys just got together and made up this story. You know, as soon as he got arrested and drug off, they started meeting together going, well, what are we going to do about this? You know, we got to do something. What are we going to tell people? I know, let's say he's not really dead, okay? And, you know, let's start a church. You know, it wasn't that way at all. They were not expecting him to be alive. And when the angels, when the men, angels said, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again, then they remembered his words. Okay? Jeannie.
But that is how sinful men think. I have been a sinful woman
Okay.
when I had no knowledge. And when I first read it, I thought, well, that could have been a story, you know. I mean, my family, those are the things that they said when we'd have soul talks. And you talk about things like that, and they'd say, how do you know? They just didn't hide the body and all this, you know. So that's how sinful people think.
And you guys, we're not going into all of the things that people have said, because you guys, as I look at this audience, you guys have heard lots of lessons on those. I wouldn't tell you anything that you hadn't already heard before. But maybe a little bit different. Think about when you've learned some skill. You know, think about when you sat down in front of your first computer. Okay, and they tried to teach you about spreadsheets, okay, or they tried to show you how to do macros, you know, and they just told you, and it didn't make a lick of sense, okay, you know, the screen was pretty and, you know, things beeped and flashed and whatever, that's kind of cool, but you went home and tried to do what they taught you in the class, and it's like, that didn't make any sense at all. But you keep at it, and then all of a sudden, you know, maybe you go back for a second class, or and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's what they were saying. And that's what you do, and that's how it works. Okay? So it's what we're talking about with the resurrection and with scriptures is so much deeper than that, so much more profound than that, and so much more emotional than that. I mean, these folks have been invested with Jesus for the last 2 or 3 years, with him every day, watching him being drug away and tortured and crucified and thrown, you know, put in a grave. It's mind-blowing. Okay? It makes my example with learning computer programs seem really, really trite. But it's like these guys said that, and it's like, oh yeah, that's what he said. And so their reaction to this, in verse 9, it says, when they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles, but they did not believe the women, because their words seemed like nonsense. Okay. Peter, however, get you in just a second, Chris. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen lying by themselves, and he went away wondering to himself what had happened. Chris.
Not too long ago, I was preaching about this, and I went through the book of John and found 4 different places before the crucifixion where Jesus told the apostles, specifically, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and be crucified and die and raise the third day. Just 4, and there's probably more than that, but there was at least 4 just in the book of John. And he did that all the time. So they had been told. But guess who believed him? The enemies of Christ are the ones that went to Pilate and got a guard put on the tomb, because he said he was going to rise up, and we don't want that to happen. So the enemies of Jesus are the ones that at least took seriously enough the threat to go and get a guard placed.
I'm not sure they believed he was actually going to rise. I think they were scared that somebody's going to steal the body,
Right.
and that they were going to make this story up. But you're right. They were making a connection.
Yeah. They were making a connection that these apostles just did not at all make.
Okay.
And I think that's amazing. And it also leads to credibility, because I thank God they placed a guard at that tomb, and there was no mistake. Okay. There was no getting around it. There was a Roman seal on that tomb and a guard posted. Yeah. And where is the body?
Yeah. Well, you've all heard the example. If the body was there, the body was somewhere to be found, as soon as they started preaching, they would roll him out in a little red wagon and follow them around wherever they were preaching, saying, don't say he's alive, here he is right here. Didn't do that. They couldn't even pay off people to get them to be believable that the bodies were stolen. So if there are four times in John, we've read three, at least three here in the Gospel of Luke. So he said it. He called his shot. He laid down his life. It wasn't taken from him. And so the women, and we've also made I think we made the point last week, is the first witnesses of the resurrection were the women. They're the folks who were testifying. They couldn't testify in court. They weren't allowed to be witnesses in court. And that coupled with the incredulity of the others is maybe why they felt the women's words were nonsense. They just weren't giving them the respect that they should have for, you thought you saw something else. You went to the wrong tomb. Just nonsense. But it says, but Peter. Who else got up with Peter? Okay, John wants you to know that he got up and he got there first. Okay, he runs faster than Peter if you read his gospel. Why focus on Peter here?
Well, maybe because he's gonna talk about him later, but
Okay.
This is a progression in Peter's realization of the events that are unfolding around him.
Okay. By the time this gospel is written, Peter is ensconced as one of the leaders of the Jerusalem church. He's the one who preaches on the day of Pentecost. Folks know, even Roman citizens know about Peter. They know who Peter is. He's the one who denied him. He's the one that Jesus said, when you've returned, strengthen your brothers. And I also think some of the very characteristics that made Peter the leader that he was, it's, okay, I hear what you say, I'm going to go see for myself. Okay? And maybe it was with, hope against hope. What if it's true? Okay? I got some things to get straight with Jesus on, okay? The last time we were together, he was looking at me right after I had denied him 3 times. So Peter gets up and he says, I'm going to check it out myself. And so he goes, and he says he went away wondering to himself what had happened. Okay? It's sort of like a lock. The tumblers are starting to fall into place as they come to grips with what has happened and the fact that he's not in the tomb. He's alive. And so then we have a story that only appears in Luke. It says, now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with him, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you only a visitor to Jerusalem, and do you not know the things that have happened there in these days? Let's stop right there. So we got these 2 guys going to Emmaus. What do you suppose their mood is? And what their conversation is like? Okay, disappointed. Probably not very excited. It says their faces were downcast when Jesus asked them, what are you talking about? It's almost as if we're going home. It's over. Okay? Passover's over. It's done. Let's just going home. Just, what does all this mean? How did this happen this way? Matt.
Well, these guys that were feeling like they placed a bet on the wrong horse. Okay. They were thinking this guy is going to redeem all of Israel, and then it seemed like it was a flop, and so they're heading home. They got to figure out, perhaps their whole identity again, because they traveled all this way to to see what the end result of this one guy was.
It says they weren't allowed, that they were kept from recognizing him. Doesn't say how. My good friend William Barclay in his commentaries, who has to come up with a natural explanation for everything, otherwise, there has to be a natural explanation, is Emmaus was west of Jerusalem, so they were walking into the sunset. And one of the problems with that is there's 3 different places that claim to be Emmaus. So, which one was it? We're going to see here from now to the end of the book that Jesus can appear and disappear when he wants to. I'm not sure it's that different from the times in the other Gospels when they tried to lay hands on him and they couldn't find him. Okay? I'm talking about the creator of the universe here. Okay? And so the ability to keep them from recognizing him. Why do you suppose he did that? Why didn't he just come up and say, "Here I am, guys. Cheer up"?
They wouldn't listen to what he was saying.
Okay.
They'd have been freaking out.
He's got some things to teach them, which we're going to see in the rest of the story. Okay. And so, did he not know what they were talking about? He asked them, he said, "What are you guys talking about?" Did he not know? He knew. He knew. And he says, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem," verse 18, "and do not know the things that have happened here in these days?" "What things?" he asked. I wonder if there's a little grin on his face. I wonder. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priest and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel." Let's stop right there. Notice how Luke phrases this. He was handed over by the chief priests. They're the ones who sent Jesus to be crucified. There's been a lot of debate over the years about, well, did the Romans crucify Jesus? Did the Jews crucify Jesus? Doesn't matter. In a big sense, it doesn't matter because they didn't take his life from him. He laid his life down for us. But Luke here is clearly saying, this got instigated not because Rome decided that Jesus was a problem and they stepped in and intervened and snatched him out of what he was putting together. It's the Jewish officials. They turned him over. They didn't believe what he was claiming to be, and they turned him over. And the result of that was he was crucified. And we're disappointed because we had hoped he was the one that was going to redeem us. And what's more, it's the 3rd day since all this took place. And in addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said. But him they did not see. So we said to them, "How foolish you are. How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and to enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in the scriptures concerning himself. Love to have been a part of that conversation. But again, the tumblers are falling into place. Now I understand. Okay. That's what that prophecy is about. See, in many ways, in the Old Testament, the prophecies and the things that were looked at as being messianic, there was just not. It was, we like the ones that talk about him being a conquering king. We like the ones that prophesy about the power and the might that he's going to have and what he can do for Jerusalem. But those things about him being a suffering servant, okay, and having to undergo being rejected and being betrayed, all those, we don't quite get those. We like these. These are the ones. And so I think what is happening, you know, I don't know what scriptures that he went to. I could guess some of the ones maybe that he used. But he's putting that together for them, is that he laid down his life. He came, he was the Messiah. And he's alive and he's enthroned, and you know, he's going to be enthroned in power. He's going to wind up at the right hand of God. Okay? But he had to suffer those things. Which is, I think, Chris, you're going to teach Hebrews here coming up in a little bit. That's what Hebrews is all about. Is about why he had to do that. You know, not just chose to do that, but we needed him to do that. And so, verse 28, as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus acted as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, stay with us. It's nearly evening. The day's almost over. So he went to stay with them. They still don't know who he is. Still hadn't recognized him. Okay? Interestingly, that Jesus didn't force himself. He didn't invite himself to dinner. You know, he acted like he was going to go on. And so they invite him. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. What do you suppose it was about him breaking bread and giving thanks that made him recognizable? Okay, he decided to turn the light bulb on. It may be as simple as that. These guys were probably not at the Last Supper when he broke bread and gave it, you know, to the 12, so probably wasn't that. Renee, you got an idea there?
He probably thanked God for the things that had happened in his prayer.
Okay. Could have been the things that he said in the prayer. Okay. Oh my goodness, we're out of time.
Did they see the scars in his hands and his feet?
Maybe.
On the nails?
Maybe. Doesn't say that. I wonder if you think about the account of feeding the 5,000. What did he do with the food? The bread and the fishes? He broke it and he blessed it. Maybe that was part of the light bulb that was going on. But at any rate, as he blessed and broke it, it's like, whoa, this is who we've been walking with this afternoon. And then he disappears, and they say, verse 32, they ask each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem, about 7 miles. Okay? If depending on which Emmaus you believe it is, this was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. How long would it take you to walk 7 miles in the dark? Okay? They found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, it's true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon. Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. We're going to stop there. We will finish up next week. I've got less than half a chapter to go. Okay? But just think about it, as you read this, think about the story that Luke is telling and how he's just laying it out, making it clear that he's alive. Folks who knew him have seen him. The tomb is empty. And, oh, by the way, it's exactly what he said he was going to do. Okay. Jeannie.
I just think it's funny how they didn't believe. And then these men, of course, Jesus reveals himself.
Okay.
But they didn't believe the women when they saw an angel, you know. And I'm like, these were good women. These were disciples of the Lord.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Anything else? Let's close with a word of prayer. God, we thank you this evening that the tomb is empty. We thank you that as we look at the Gospels and we see the things that are discussed, and well, each is telling in his own voice to a different audience the facts that they lay out. Just make it clear that the tomb is empty. And because of that, Jesus is at your right hand, and he is our high priest that allows us to approach you. Just grateful for all that he did for us, that he laid his life down. It wasn't taken from him. God, help us to, it's really beyond our grasp in a lot of ways, but help us to grasp that, to be appreciative of it, and to live in a way that's in response to that. Be with us as we part. Bless us with a safe trip home. Watch over us. Be with us in our situations tomorrow. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.